Hi everyone, Dr. Pinder here, and we are out at the Cohotate Preserve in Athens, New York for another video. Today we're talking about invasive species. The first one that we have right here is Phragmites, and just as we mentioned in class, this guy can grow pretty huge, it's pretty long, and it's going to be forming really dense thickets of a monoculture. Remember, this is a monoculture is where you have just one species kind of crowding out everybody else. What's interesting about this find is that we have a couple other invasive species that are in here as well. And if I kind of move the Phragmites out of the way, we also have our Oriental bittersweet. And as I mentioned in class, this is a climbing vine that's going to do damage to trees mostly when it grows up in a spiral, and it's going to suffocate the tree. So it's interesting, this guy found a Phragmites to climb up. Another one we have here is our Japanese stiltgrass. This is another one that likes to invade our area, and you can see it has those kind of like walking up stilts for this type of grass. So we're on the trail that circles the pond that is on the Cohotate Preserve, and as you guys can see, the Phragmites behind me is grown really tall and it's grown really thick all the way around the pond. What we've also found at this pond is that good old Eurasian milfoil. This is the one that is introduced into a lot of our waterways accidentally. It's initially come from the aquarium trade, and if I were to just take pieces of this and break it up and toss it into different places, it would be able to grow. You can kind of see that it's growing just new sprouts on top of each other. And so what people have done is they have dumped their aquaria in this water, and that has resulted in a lot of the milfoil taking over. It forms really dense mats of vegetation, ultimately leading to low oxygen levels in the water. What you can also find that we haven't spotted just yet are goldfish in here, and that's again because people have dumped their fish tanks, unfortunately. So we've only walked a little bit down the trail, maybe about 10 feet, and we found another invasive that's doing well with our Phragmites. And this is that multiflora rose. So remember, multiflora rose is an invasive rose bush. It does have a really pretty white rose on it in the summertime. It does make rose hips that the birds like to eat and poop and spread it around. And it has these kind of long branches that are thorns, ridden with thorns, that can be very annoying. Here we found another version of that multiflora rose. This is an older plant that's been here for a while, so it has more of like a shrub-like appearance. And it is kind of sad looking a little bit with its leaves, but what we can see on here is it has those rose hips that the birds would eat, and then that ultimately spreads this around. This is Japanese barberry. This is the one that we were talking about in class that was widely planted for landscaping. Landscapers love this. It's a very hardy shrub. You can prune it into different shapes, and it has really nice color when it turns in the fall. It does have these thorns underneath that are quite sharp and annoying if you get them on your skin. And they're also going to have, again, berries that birds have adapted to eat, and these are what's going to be spreading these guys throughout in the woods. And once they're established, they're very hardy. They have a very deep root system. So if you're going to try to remove them, you really have to dig down pretty deep to get all the root. This little guy here is also barberry. You can see it does have the thorns on it, and it looks about like this when it's this small. And this size, it's pretty easy to pull it out. You can just grasp at the base and give it a pull, and that will help out your ecosystem. One other thing we found as we're walking around the pond is quite a bit of common buckthorn. I've been looking for one that has some berries. This guy just has one berry left on it. Normally these are purple and shiny. Again, these are things spread by birds eating these. Unfortunately, these are not super nutritious for birds, so this invasive is something that's providing a low quality food source for our birds. So right now we're down by the Hudson River, and what I found is actually a remnant of an invasive, and it's the seed hulls of the water chestnut. And some people call these devil's head because of their shape, and anyone who has ever stepped on one of these knows that they are not your friend. They hurt, they will go through shoes, and they are littered all over the place here with our other good friend, Oriental Bittersweet. You see they cover the ground almost completely down here by the river where they wash up with the tide. So this guy, you may be thinking to yourself, is just another run-of-the-mill sugar maple, but this is that one we talked about, the Norway maple, also known as the ash maple, that is invasive and not quite as good for us as our sugar maple because it doesn't make as good of maple syrup. It's also one that forms pretty dense stands and shades out things underneath it and prevents it from growing under it. Remember, this is going to have a much wider leaf than our sugar maple, but remember the key I was telling you guys about in class is that when you pluck the leaf stem, it's going to have that white milky sap that comes out. Even this time of year in the fall, you still get some of that white coming out. If it was a sugar maple, it would be clear. So again, we're down by the river, which is why part of the reason why it's so windy, but what I have here is an ash tree. And now an ash tree is not invasive, but something that's damaging the ash tree is. You may think to yourself, well, there's this big crazy vine that's growing up on it. It's not that. That is actually poison ivy. The berries here are really nutritious for birds. And if you notice the way that this vine is growing, it's going straight up with the trunk, unlike that Oriental Bittersweet, which will grow around the trunk and cut off the flow of nutrients and water in the tree. So the poison ivy is all right, although it does cause harm to human health if you were to touch it. But what I'm interested with this ash tree is the emerald ash borer. Now, I didn't see an emerald ash borer, but I do see the signs of the emerald ash borer being present. The first one is the leaves on the top of the tree are almost non-existent. This time of year it's hard to tell, but really what we're looking for here is this blonding of the bark. So normally the ash bark would be more of this intact part right here, but here is where woodpeckers have been picking away the layers of this bark. And now the woodpeckers are not damaging the tree, they're just going, well, they are pecking at it, but they're going after the stuff underneath that is damaging it. And so typically what you'll see with these ash trees is that they have this blonding where the woodpeckers have been taking advantage of that food source. But also, if you have to look closely, but there are some D-shaped holes. So here's one here, and I have some better ones down here. So here's another one. The D-shaped hole, and then here's another. This is a really good one here. So these are the exit holes for the emerald ash borer that's coming out. Remember, it's living under the bark of this tree, and it's going to be hurting the tree by, again, cutting off flow of nutrients up and down the tree by feeding on the tree's tissues. Now here we have that Oriental Bittersweet, and again, it's going to be this vine that wraps around and around, even on itself, but you can actually see on this tree where it wound itself around, tightening itself, where someone came along and cut it, so it's no longer doing damage, particularly at this point in the tree. But as we kind of look up along the tree, it is growing around it. And this tree happens to also be the tree of heaven, which is that Islandus altissima, which is another non-native species. So here is the Oriental Bittersweet with the berries on it, and this is what people would make wreaths with, because this time of year they're this nice bright red and orange, and so this guy here has those berries on it. And then you can also see along here we have a lot more of that stilt grass that's growing on the edge. Here's another great example of that oriental bittersweet and the view of the berries. So right here we have a nice patch of Japanese stilt grass, which is actually kind of pretty, and it has this nice, it's turning color for the fall, and it has this really nice purple leaf. But what I wanted to direct our attention to is this garlic mustard. So this is first year garlic mustard. Garlic mustard, remember, is that invasive that actually can be eaten and tastes like garlic and mustard. It's a biennial, which means that these guys here are in their first year, and when they come back next year they're going to flower and go to seed, and then that'll be the end for them. So garlic mustard is one of those invasives that is kind of satisfying to pull, because not only, like I said, you can eat it, but it is something that it comes out of the ground relatively easily, and if you get all of the first years, they won't come back next year, and then you can kind of get ahead of it. So if you have a localized population, it's pretty easy to control. So what we have here is kind of the invasive species paradise, I would like to say. This guy here is a perfect example of that Japanese barberry that, you know, people plant in their yard because it looks so pretty this time of year. The leaves will turn this really nice red and orange color. But this was not planted here. It got here because the birds ate the seeds and then pooped it out in this spot, and then it becomes pretty established. Other things we've got going on here, we have mugwort, which is invaded the area, our oriental bittersweet, and we even have a whole bunch of multiflora rose over in here too. Just across the trail from where we just were, there's again tons of mugwort, and here's more multiflora rose with those rose hips. Now again, we have the mugwort here, and this is something that it is a medicinal herb, and some people enjoy mugwort quite a bit, but as you can see, it can become a pest in an ecosystem, and this in particular is probably the biggest patch I've ever seen, where it just has grown where it's a complete monoculture underneath. You can see there's just a few things of grass growing underneath, and it grows really tall, where this is probably about 6 feet tall, and it covers anywhere where they are not mowing repeatedly. Right now I'm in a patch of Japanese knotweed. This is something that a lot of people think of it as a bamboo. It's not actually a real bamboo, but the reason they think that is it has this really long cylindrical shape in this hollow stem. The leaves of the Japanese knotweed have kind of a straightish base, and they're pretty leathery and tough, and normally these would have little whitish yellow flowers on them, but they've gone by. You can also tell that the stems are, they kind of look like bamboo when they're green. And the reason it's a problem is because, as you can see behind me, it forms this really dense monoculture, and the root system gets really deep and is really pervasive. So even if you mow this, it will still come back. Even if you dig most of it out of the ground, it just takes a few fragments for it to come back. Mowing it can actually spread it, where little chunks of it can fly off and can further the spread. So this is one that once you have it, it's really, really tricky to get rid of.